Hooray. We luck out. Well, we are right in the middle of a tedious and painfully slow rendition of Northern European creation myths. The first time we talked about Northern European culture and why it was that way, depending on the climate and a lot of other factors, and depending on its time in history. Then last time we began talking about Ginnungagap, which is a great void or a great chaos or space. It has our word gap in it. And we spent almost the whole time talking about space. And toward the end, we got to the big giant Ymir, or Ymir, or Weimar, or Ymir, or something like that, who was found in Ginnungagap, was a regional space. And one region was called Niflheim, and that was the region of ice. And the other region was called Muspelheim, and that was the region of fire. And where the two regions met, there was a great steam that formed. But gradually, though it doesn't say so outright, the fire began to accede over the ice, and it began to melt. And as it melted, Ymir was found inside of the ice. And it took us almost 2 hours last week to get that far. This time it's going to take 2 hours to get almost no farther. It's just so exciting to me, and I'm beginning to think almost like an old man now, because I actually have a little bit of self-control, which I never ever thought I would have in life. And with that, I do things more slowly. So we just took things for granted last time. We said that in Ginnungagap there was fire and ice, and that they appeared, more or less. But that's not true. Something doesn't come from nothing. Even cold and heat, or darkness and light, which are two of the other attributes of Niflheim and Muspelheim. Polarization is and was antecedent to the fire and ice. And polarization has to come from somewhere. Now, it's obvious that the polarizations are in the one. The one being knows itself. And by that act of knowing itself within the absolute, the unmanifest absolute is known more or less as everything that is not self. And between self and not self is the continuous bridge that we call consciousness, which goes all the way from acute waking self-consciousness to a deep, dark state of almost unconsciousness. This realization of the ends or the directional ends of the line of consciousness is a kind of parapolarization. That is, we know self and we know what is not self. Now, this parapolarization is continuous in all of the potentials within the Absolute, that is, time and space. It is continuous not only to the One, but to every waking focus that is within the One. Because every being that is awake, that knows itself, is within the one being. And that parapolarization, which becomes an actual polarization in manifest being, extends right down to us. Every time we watch ourselves, or view ourselves, or know ourselves, no matter how complete or incomplete that self-knowing is, in that same waking self-knowing is also an awareness of not self, or of the unknown. Sometimes it doesn't dawn on us. When we're in the awareness of self, we are so awed by what is in us that is truly our true nature, that though we really can't much take credit for it, that we don't recognize it right away. And that eventually we become aware of the fact, uncomfortably, it creeps in on us, that there is a lot that is not self, and that we are not always aware of. And it doesn't only apply to self-knowledge, it applies to all knowledge. In the very moment we know something, whether it's something we knew before, but especially if we learn something new and know something new, in that very act we recognize that there are a lot of other things that we don't know. So it goes through all knowing, all awakening, and from every being, from the universal to the particular. Now, when we're looking at it in Gnungagap, the polarization, even the parapolarization, of light and darkness, cold and heat, we're looking at it in the most simple, the most abstract, the most fundamental way. But it is, with a great degree of complexity, present on every other level. It's very important for us to recognize that and remember that, because in all of those moments, especially the moments when we approach the One in prayer, it's important that we realize that continuity and that we have that faith, because in moments of prayer, all of the light is surrounded by the shadow of unknowing, and what could be an enlightening experience is sometimes almost something to dash all of our faith. eventually, if we can expand the moment and put ourselves in the moment completely and concentrate our whole being in it, that attention or that moment becomes identical with the moment of the divine, or we can have the union with God. Now, how to say some of these things? The way a lot of this works is that there is a polarization, a direction to the polarization, so that the more inward we become, the more spiritual and the more self-oriented we become. The more outward, the more material, and the more separate, and the more other we become. Now, all of these things are directional, and they're not focal. It's like saying that going outward is more frozen, colder, more separative, more complex, whereas going inward is more light and more warm and more unified and more simple. But in all cases, it's comparative. The more we proceed in one direction, the more our attitude is one way, and the more we proceed in another direction, the more our attitude is another. So there is, in the comparative, it's very, very relative. In fact, the person who is almost completely external in focus of attention is so completely relativist that the whole life becomes subjective. Or a person who's completely inward is almost solipsistic. Now, a focal awareness is not comparative, it's very definitive. And it is extremely objective. So when we are looking at being, there is a polarity right within the unity of being. Not just between being and not being, but right within being itself, in a spiritual sense, there is a polarity. There is a polarity that is the two poles of one, you might say. No, and the two poles of one, there's a mathematical analogy for all of this, is like the focal spiritual oneness is a point. Everything is brought to a point. It's very, very precise. It is very, very well defined. The other pole of one, now here comes the illusionary part. We have to draw something here that is extremely... The other pole of one is the universe. That is the whole. And clearly, the attention put in the whole results in a waking kind of consciousness that is very, very much different than being focused in one point. But they are both ones. One is a point, and one is, you don't even want to say everything, because thingness isn't important. One is all, but you don't even want to say all because all implies that there are many. One is, in a universal sense. It's a very different kind of consciousness. The true circle, this is a faraway cry from a true circle, the point is so small that all it has is its location. And the circle is so large that its radius approaches infinity. It doesn't quite make it, though. The limit of the radius of consciousness approaching infinity depends on the intensity of the being or of the capacity of the being to know itself. That is, how well we can contemplate ourselves or how well the Supreme Being can contemplate self by centering. To that extent is the one manifest in the potential of time and in the potential of space within the Absolute. Now, it's much more complicated than this, because when it comes to the spiritual world, the universe, the location is in one place, but one place it means something much different. Because it is, this is a flat sphere, and our consciousness right now is a three-dimensional sphere of consciousness. But when you come to multidimensionality, the focal point is in a number of dimensions all at the same time. And there are a number of directions all at the same time, and there are a number of radii all at the same time, so that the full waking cosmic consciousness in the Supreme Being is quite something. I'm sure that God isn't, or the Supreme Being isn't neurotic in thinking about all the dimensions that it's manifesting at the same time. It doesn't work that way. However, when you are in the attention of the universe, you're aware of all of that at the same time. It's all within. It's a very internalized thing. And when you're focusing, whether we're focusing in our own bodies or whether we're focusing inward through a single focus, you can go within and within and within. It doesn't make any difference how many dimensions. You can keep on going. All of what we're talking about, this is the first year I've ever talked much about space. Maybe that's why I'm having such a field day with it. I've always talked about time. All of the things that we are talking about now with regard to the potential of space in which spirit is primarily manifest, and which matter is primarily manifest, apply equally well to time where spirit is more manifest. They are two potentials that need each other in the same way that spirit and matter need each other. You can look at an instant and a moment as being the same thing as a point and the universe. That in the consciousness of God, it is now in a momental sense, and the awareness of that consciousness is attained in an instant when that instant is taken as now more important than anything ever before or ever after. So you might say the relationship of the point to the infinite radius circle or almost infinite radius circle is the same thing as the relationship to what we hear in spiritual terms when we hear about now and forevermore. now being the instant and forevermore. All right. We're going to continue on, though, looking at it in terms of space rather than in terms of time, because as we've said before, the Northern European mythology is greatly suited to space in a scientific sense. We talked last time about the melting of fire and ice, the fire melting the ice. We talked about that in terms of nebular theory. Now we're going to go a little bit further. Now, existence is both active and passive. When one says God is, that can be taken as a passive statement of fact, that being is. But it is also, by the act of the most subtle capacity of spirit, the will, it is an active state. So that being is very much an activity of the will to be. So being is actualizing within space. But that actualization within space doesn't destroy the potential. Last time we talked about the block of marble out of which a statue is hewn, and that within that block of marble there were an almost infinite number of statues that could come out of it. But in the process of hewing away everything that was not the statue, that was in the spirit of the sculptor, all of those other potentials, or most of them, unless they're smaller than the statue, and you want to reduce it even further to a littler statue, all of those other potentials are destroyed. But in the absolute, in absolute space, the manifestation of being as manifesting one potential doesn't in any way destroy any of the others, because they're still all there, because the absolute is untouched by all of it. And the darkness knew it not, meaning to say that it doesn't know what happens in the light. The being, then, that is non-destructive, there is limitation. You can't be all the other things all at one time. There's limitation according to your spiritual consciousness, even spiritual capability, even onto the level of the Supreme Being. The manifestation or being, or the states of being, are different outlooks of consciousness. They're very different attitudes. The attitude of the point versus the attitude of the universe are two different attitudes. And one can have an illusion that they are something other than attitudes. And the two attitudes of the point versus the universe are in fact interlocked. That is to say, the ability to focus or to center or to place attention inward to a center determines the general state of being in the universal. And if the attitude of focusing on the center is called concentration, and the attitude that has the general consciousness is called meditation, the two of them are completely interdependent. There is no meditation without concentration. There is no bigger view without a point for it to rest on or even to come into being through. It is again very much like Archimedes. Give me a place to stand on and I can move the whole earth. So the relationship of the polarization of one between point or locus and the universe, which is an attitude of totality, are completely interlocked. You might say the more deeply one can concentrate, that much more can one radiate to a larger conception of things, but not only a larger conception of things, a conception of things that is thicker and richer and fuller, almost like a crystal. It becomes that thick. So there is then, in states of consciousness, you might say the proverbial speck or point, which atomic scientists keep trying to find smaller and smaller and smaller flecks, so that they have an irreducible state of material existence. From that all the way to the universal spiritual consciousness of the Supreme Being, there is, relatively speaking, a continuous ladder of hierarchy between focal awareness and general awareness. And at each of those levels, there are beings. Like human beings are right in the middle. We're right at that point where we go back and forth between concentration and meditation, where we have the ability to focus our attention both ways. Obviously, there are many, many gradients of being in the spiritual worlds above us. It would be really nice to say that the universe is more like spirit and that the point or the position or the locus is like matter, but unfortunately it doesn't quite work out that way, because there is a spiritual quality to a position just as much as there is a spiritual quality to raw universal being. Now, in Northern European, you see, we haven't gotten anywhere since last week. It goes on forever and ever, but it's starting to speed up now. There'll be a lot of storytelling because I'll be all run out of things to say. If Ginnungagap in Northern European mythology represents the universal void, the universal, what's the word they use? Not chasm, not gap, abyss is the word that is used by Northern European philosophers. If Ginnungagap is the universal, I don't know how to spell these Northern European words. Vergelmer represents the focal relationship to space. Now we're back at the story. A little side trip there. So Genungagap is the universal, Virgulmer is the particular. Virgulmer is a fountain, or it is a well. And it is a most unusual fountain, but because what comes out of it is not water, but liquid fire. Liquid fire and light. And from Virgulmer, it comes out as 12 rivers. Oops. I don't know if I got 12 here, but I'm pretty close, I think. 3, 6, 9, 12. How did I luck out? I didn't even count. And the rivers are called the Ilivagar. And these are the source of liquid light and fire. So this fountain begins in what might be termed an empty space, which is so empty that it's filled with the potential for everything. And it is so subtle that none of the potentials of what it could be can even be realized. There's no distinguishing feature in them at all. Then there is something that a supreme being, which we have hypothesized is the Genunga in Genungagap, who is so subtle that it isn't even seen as a giant, or a titanic giant, as we said last time. And this manifests itself, and it manifests itself at Virgulmer, and from that center outflows light and heat. And it doesn't quite say this in the mythology, but these rivers flow out until they reach a point where they freeze. And they freeze into the ice. And the way the Norse mythographers say it, they freeze into the ice in the same way that flame freezes into a spark or into something, a glowing solid. So we talked last time about the relationship of the assertion of will and the statement of the known congealing within that ever subtle potential of space. It congeals its ignorance as matter, which in this case is ice. This is a really, really beautiful conception of the cosmos, and it has so much information. We're only going to talk just in the rawest, simplest sense, the most material sense about this whole process, though sometime in life I'd like to come back and talk about this on multiple levels of being. We're only going to talk just a little bit. Now, last time we created an image that was a true image, but it wasn't the most perfect and appropriate image. It works, but there's something else that works better. And so now we have to go back to thinking about space all over again. And that is, how do we relate to our consciousness in and of space and things that are in and of space? And there are two ways that this is done, or the two ways that it can be done. The one that we use most often and we almost take for granted, and it is that way because our concept of the world is so materialistic and so external that in our simplified consciousness that can only understand 3 dimensions, it turns out to be a very appropriate way of dealing with things. And it is what mathematicians would call Cartesian coordinates. And Cartesian coordinates is one of the ways that we relate to space. That at any time that we relate to space, we can have a center, and there is straight ahead, straight back, to the right, to the left, up, and down. 6 directions of space. These are called Cartesian coordinates. And the Virgulmer point is called the origin, where the different directions meet. It is a very nice way of looking at things, but there is another way, and this other way is much more like the picture that we get from Virgulmer, and that is a polar coordinate. In a polar coordinate, you have 2 coordinates, but you don't much care about them, a horizontal and a vertical, and talking about equality of concentration and hitting the point. It's humiliating. And that is, you have a point and you have a radius, and you measure the distance of the radius as d, and relative to the horizontal, you don't say this way or that way, you make a circle all the way around it, and you say in the horizontal, oops, so I make the symbol for the vertical. The angle from one point, which is taken as a reference point straight ahead, so you don't even need this, and you don't even need this. That's all you need is this, and you have, you say theta, the angle of theta from a direction, and then there is another, in 3-dimensional space, there is a vertical circle, and then you say the angle this way. So a point here would be so far along on the horizontal circle and out that radius, and it would be up so much for in the phi angle. And so any place in space can be defined by either a Cartesian coordinate or by a polar coordinate. We're talking 3-dimensional space. It works for 2-dimensional space, and it works for higher dimensions of space also. Okay. From a spiritual point of view, and from the point of view of consciousness, the 2 coordinate systems are very different from each other. In fact, if you take figures and plot figures of geometrical functions or trigonometrical functions in Cartesian space, those figures look different than if you plot them in polar space. It turns out that more of the rawest forms like waves, ocean waves and sand dunes and things like that are more like what you see in Cartesian coordinates, but like the shapes of flowers and leaves and living things are more like what you see in polar coordinates. So there is plenty of both. So in the Cartesian coordinate, you have 3 things. You have the x direction, you have the y direction, and you have the z direction. So the location is x, y, z of any given point. Yes? No, they're all circles. It's like saying, suppose I'm taking the reference point as that wing wall there. The horizontal reference is, and let's say I'm trying to get to that second light from the centerpiece there. I would say it's theta this way and phi this way, and d, the point from my eyes to that light. So it's theoretically a circle that goes all the way around on a horizontal, and one that goes in a vertical, all through a common point in direction. There's a what? They are imaginary circles. Circles in perspective, yeah. All right. You know the words better than I do. What? No, they're circles. They're imaginary circles. I drew it. Yeah, right. Oh, that's all right. That should say, all right. And she's saying that's a circle in perspective because it looks like an ellipse. All right. Yes. He's British. I don't know about them. Yeah. Now, the XYZ way of looking at space or measuring space or understanding space has all the conceptions and misconceptions of materialism. It appears to be the way we see things. You know, it's so many steps forward and so many steps to the left and this high off the ground. But the XYZ, relative to an origin, has negative directions in space. And that may be a very fine mathematical conception, but we're not. What is negative space? In this sense of the word, it's not negative space by everything that is not that chair. Negatives are in an existential framework, negatives are impossible. So that it works very fine to have a +1 and a -1 bring you back to the origin, or one of the vertices of the origin, but that works out mathematically. But what is negative? You know, if we think of it in a time sense, is negative time the past or is negative time the future? Because it hasn't been yet. Like when you're talking about existence, to talk about non-existence in a meaningful way is not something that is possible. Some people even go so far as to say that the concept of negative numbers and the necessity of them in Cartesian coordinates are inventions of bankers. And in terms of the mathematics, in terms of the history of mathematics, that is possible. That people wanting the idea of debt and having people indebted to them and having a negative existence so that they can be more positive is a conception that follows along fairly well. In a polar coordination, it is, you look at things relative to the horizontal, and the horizontal always represents the passive receptive plane. Because like the Earth is receptive, it receives sun and the rains come down, and the horizon is something that we can see as a passive thing. A vertical, the phi direction, not the theta direction, but the rising upward represents an active state. So that a scale is not the same thing as a color wheel. In a color wheel, all of the colors are equal to each other and they are horizontal. But a scale, in some ways, the tones each have a value relative to each other that is equal. But as you rise in a scale, there is a change of consciousness that is not just difference in flavor, it is a change that is qualitative, and it is more active, and it is more, like the higher you get to the higher frequencies, you get to the faster or the more intense attention. So when we have two angles and a radius of projection, we're talking about the whole field is different than if you say to the right or to the left and forward and back and up and down. The field is very different. Everything in the polar system is rotational. it isn't static. Everything in the Cartesian way of looking at space is very static. The especially polar coordination relates to the perfect sphere of spirit, whereas matter is always related to the cube of matter. And that's what this is. We're at the origin where all the things meet. So the cube of space and matter is something very, very distinct, and something where there are limits, whereas the perfected surface of the sphere has no edges. It's seamless, it's beginningless, it's endless, it's timeless. And the sphere or circle has always been associated with spirit. And the relating of the spiritual consciousness and trying to make it manifest in matter, that is trying to take a circle and turn it into a square, or a cube and turning it, a sphere and turning it into a cube, is one of those insoluble problems. The squaring of the circle. Pi then represents the relationship between the perfect conception in spirit and the limitation. It's a ratio. There's a continuous ratio between perfected spiritual consciousness and manifest spiritual, how would you say it, becoming. There's always a gap there. There's always an imperfection. All right, I didn't mean to get into that. I didn't even want to go into that. So, this brings us back to Gnungagap. And we'll try to stay with the circle. We'll try to stay two-dimensional first before going into a three-dimensional. We'll just take a moment or two and look at three-dimensional. The reason that the circle is considered mystical and the polar coordinates, which are more circular in nature, are considered mystical is because the center represents an internality, which it doesn't have necessarily in Cartesian space. That if we have a circle and we're standing at the origin, the extent of how far we can extend a radius out depends on our degree of projection. But all of the meaningfulness of this has to do with the orientation to the point. It is either out or in. Right or left or up and down doesn't make any difference. And going into the origin has a quality of inwardness. And it has a quality, boy, it's hard. This is something for the last 7 years at least, I've been trying to understand the meaning of the word within in experience, in concentration and meditation. And it's obvious that I don't understand that yet because I've only gotten a few little things, and the essence of it I don't have. But there is a spatiality in turning inward. And this is the whole dependence. Let me just go back to what I said before. This is so hard to say these things. The dependence of the externality depends on how well we can go into ourselves. the better we go into ourselves, the better because we have to go back to something we talked about last time. If we want to understand something in the external world, the only way we can understand it is to turn inward. And the only way we can understand something inside ourselves is to look outward. The example of understanding something inside of ourselves is to take any subject and say, well, what do I think about that? And then you start writing, or you start talking, or you start extending your thoughts, and in thinking about that thing outside of yourself or expressing yourself about that, you know what you are inside, because it comes out to you. You say, oh my goodness, I knew that all the while, and or this is the way I felt about things all the while. Very often it takes something like jealousy over with another person to recognize that that person helps you to realize some insufficiency or inadequacy inside of yourself, and or to recognize a tone or a color or something like that in the process of making that or replicating it, you realize something that is inside of yourself. But on the other hand, if you want to understand how somebody else's expression goes, even to like copying their handwriting, if you copy exactly right over the top of their handwriting and try to do the same thing that they did, you have to feel the way they did in order to do it. And so you can't understand someone outside of yourself without going in yourself and experiencing it inside of yourself. All right. Now, in the Great Circle, or in the celestial sphere, all of the invisible, imaginary dividing lines between regions of space, or pieces, wedges of pie, or orange segments in three-dimensional spaces, all of the breaking up of the stories in the myths, in the constellations of the zodiac, all of those places like the celestial equator, or the ecliptic path of the sun and the planets, or the north-south line from the north and south poles, or the north-south lines from the north and south pole of the ecliptic. All of those are called colliers. And all of the colliers in space that divide one mythical area from another mythical area have always been represented as two things, one of two things. Sometimes they're represented as serpents, and as serpents they then represent wily, not even wily, but cunning and subtle and very recondite wisdom is what the serpent has always represented. If you look in the pictures of the heavens in all periods of history, you find snakes all over the place. And if they aren't snakes, the other things that they are rivers. The river Eridanus, for example, is a big one in Western mythology, and the Ganga is one in the Orient, and their rivers are broken up all over. So the 12 Ilivgar that flow from Hervagulmer represent flows of consciousness. And they represent flows of consciousness that aren't just directional, but they represent stages or states or qualities of consciousness. So that even though it is light and fire that is flowing out in each of the rivers, it is a different quality river or a different quality of fire and light that is coming out from each one. So there's something like a color wheel. And these flavors of consciousness then represent in either 2- or 3-dimensional space or more, I would guess, they represent 12 different perspectives of consciousness. That is to say that in the Supreme Being, or on a lower level in God, or on yet another lower level in a human, that when we are facing any which way, that our conscious attention in each of the 12 directions of space is of a different flavor. This is a very interesting conception. A very interesting conception. And if this is light that according to its angle, be it theta, or be it phi, or be it both of them, then this light is flavored. And you see we have a really scientific view of the cosmos. Because what is flavored light along an angular difference but spectroscopy? That is, we have a spectral breakup of light that relative to, like from one source, it's a common white light as it comes out. But relative to looking at different angles at it, it has different flavors, and that is to say that the light is broken down in different ways. Now, the whole spectral outlook is something that we're going to find runs throughout all of Northern European philosophy, more than mythology and spiritual outlook, more than in any other spiritual outlook from any other part of the world. The whole spectral outlook is there. We're going to run into rainbow bridges all over the place. It is not only just spectral light, meaning just to say different colors, but each of these lights has a different attitude. Just like saying when you look at red, you get one feeling, and when you look at blue, you get another feeling. Or if you look at that orange on the top of the refrigerator and then picture it being blue, you suddenly find out that if you make it a dark midnight blue, that orange shrinks in size, so that there are psychological qualities to different colors and to different kinds of light. And so what we actually have here is literally, like Virgulmer is the fountain at the middle of the cosmic mandala, and the signs of the zodiac, each of which has a different spiritual outlook on what the cosmos is each of them is one of the rivers, and each of them has a coloring all of its own, and each has a unique viewpoint. And if any of you have ever gone through a very elementary astrology class, you see that each of those viewpoints has a very different outlook on what the cosmos is, and that they are so perfectly balanced between them that the conception of a cosmos is very, very total. And it has many, many outlooks to it, and each of them is balanced in all sorts of different ways. I don't want to go into that because I spent an entire year doing that in one of the other classes. Also, this conception is spiritual in another way, because the closer you are to Virgulmer, the hotter it is and the more light that there is, and so there is a hierarchical quality. There is not necessarily a hierarchical quality in Cartesian. Cartesian coordinates are for people who believe in democracy, which is all right. It's a part of reality. And it brings in the way of switching to different levels and deeper states of withinness. Because if you remember from a couple years ago, we did the fairy tale of the two caskets. And you remember the heroine gets pushed into the well, and when she falls into the well, she comes out in another world. And in that other world, things are different. And in that other world, she gains treasures that are very, very valuable relative to the evaluation of this material world. And so we have in here, in the polar coordinate system, we have an infinite going inward as well as an infinite going outward, whereas in the Cartesian you have an infinite going outward and nothing more. This also gives us a different conception of Muspelheim and Niflheim. Niflheim is more outward, and Muspelheim is more toward the origin of fire. So that it isn't just like we picture the Earth, where at the poles it is cold and at the equator it's hot, and that where the two of them meet is the region of steam. That works. But this is a view that has, and the further outward you go, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that with the projection of consciousness outward, there arises a resistance from without coming back in, such that space gets congealed according to our assertion of will. And that the freezing of the rivers is a way of saying that our spiritual inspiration, our spiritual projection, our creative urge has solidified the unknown of which we are ignorant as an image of what our creative projection has been. But it isn't just the creative projection, it is also what is unknown. And that in the struggle then between the fire and the ice, gradually the fire melts the ice, and the unknown becomes part of the known, and it becomes, like the grand human being, the giant Ymir, is found within this whole process of taking this trip into the unknown, doing this creative thing or creative project, or having this necessity to be, or having this curiosity, like I wonder what it is, or even to some extent a cosmic uncertainty, because we know that we are incomplete. And the Supreme Being, as total and as self-sufficient as it is, must realize that it is incomplete, otherwise there would not be a continuous ongoing of manifestation. All right. So we see here then the region of thaw is somewhere along the middle of the radius, but it is a scalar system that eventually it goes further and further out until that which was darkness is now light, and the unknown, through the process of familiarization and through the process of loving that which is unknown, or that which could be, just like we love into existence the statue, it becomes known, it gets changed, and we as creators become changed at the same time. So we find that the Ilivagar give us a very, very accurate description of both our material experience and our mystical experience in a very, very clear and profound way. See, we still haven't gotten back to where we were last year. Last time we met 2 weeks ago. But now we jump ahead after this week. We jump ahead very fast. Now, if we put the fountain at the sun and let the sun be the origin of heat and light that flows outwards in all directions, and as it cools, it freezes, it becomes matter. Now, this myth, as crude as it seems, describes exactly what physics tells us. That through spectral astronomy and the evolution of stars, all of these things, this blackboard, all of the stuff that we exist in, is frozen light. Exactly. It tells us. So this is not only this myth gives us not only a nebular view of the cosmos, but it gives us a how would you say it? What is the proper term? Quantum mechanical view of the universe at the same time. And even the planets themselves, or where the harmonics where the planets form, as shown us by Bode's law, they are like giant rings, the orbits. So we have a very, very good scientific conception. And we also have the whole way, again, that inspiration becomes consolidated as creative things. Now, I can't speak yet from experience, and it may be a long time before I can, about orientation in space. Whether if one is contemplating self and is united with the One, which means that the center of our being is made concentric with Vergelmer, and that is the 2 points become one, and we have devotional union or adoration with God. In that state of concentricity, then there should be an experience. I love it. There should be an experience of space that is dimensional. And in that dimensional quality, the orientation, one should literally feel not only the totality of the universe, but the flavors of it in the different directions and in the different places. I can't say that that's true. Another interesting thing about all this is that if we change our view to a polar view, whether in 2 dimensions or in 3 dimensions, then Ymir, by the way, Ymir has another name, because some mystics called him not Ymir, but some called him Ogomir. Just to confuse things. I don't know the etymology of either name. If I got into the etymologies and carried that much further, I'd get carried away and we'd never get past Gunungagap. It would be the story of my life. I never make it past Gunungagap. Oh, boy. All right. If you take the Cartesian viewpoint in 2 dimensions, then you have a crucified Ymir, and that he is crucified on a 3-dimensional space where the heat comes from up here and the cold comes from down here. And this must be the origin of cold feet, right? Hot-headedness and cold feet. Interesting, huh? I never thought about it that way. Because hot-headedness is associated with Aries, and chicken qualities or fearful qualities are associated with Pisces. Cold feet, all right. All these. But on the other hand, if we look at the somewhere between the fire and the ice with the thawing, if we have someone like the midsection is about here, and the arms are here, and the intestines are here, and the heart is here, and the stomach is here, and then the feet would be back here, and we have a Ymir that is circular in space. And Ymir then is divided into 12 pieces. And we have the zodiacal human. We have the zodiacal being coming in. And we go right back to some of our old friends that we've talked about from past years. This is Osiris, who's cut into 12 pieces. And we have Dionysus, who is cut up. And we have the original Adam, Adam Primus. And so we have the whole conception of the Cartesian human being crucified in physical matter, seen in space. The organs represent different stages of consciousness, so that we can say, like Shakespeare, I feel for him in my bowels. And that really works, that when you have a certain kind of compassion, you feel in your intestines for something that somebody else is going through. Let's just take a few seconds and look at Virgilmer and the Ilivagar in 3 dimensions. And we have also another old friend of ours, and that is the crystal ball. Remember when we said that that there is an image of the crystal ball where there is a focusing from a central consciousness out. And it depends on the internal consciousness that this light goes out. But it reflects from the manifestations of itself. The gods move on the surface of the deep and they focus back in on the center. Somewhere between them is a lens. And that lens is the crystal ball, and that is the area that is fluid and not frozen. That is live and not reflective. And therefore, we would have a light going through the lens and then being projected out and then reflecting back in. And when it comes back through the lens the other way, it would be again focused into a heart and core of things, relighting itself and intensifying its own self by its own inwardness. That indeed the consciousness of God depends on the adoration of the gods focusing on it. And there is that kind of attention that intensifies its own being, because if each being in the cosmos is in itself an individual focus of that one universal creation, as each one manifests it, it brings back its own experience as a creation, and that the light of the one that began the whole creation is redoubled a multitude of times over. And so you have this same kind of conception if you take Virgilmer and the Ilivagar in 3 dimensions, and that's about as much as we want to say about that, because we've talked about that already. It's an interesting conception in another way, because this is the way Plato described the earth, as an out-of-the-body experience. He described it as one of those balls that our children kick around that have little patches. He's describing a dodecahedron. You know what a dodecahedron looks like? It's 12 pentagrams, perfectly regular pentagrams, sewed together, and they form a circle, very much like a volleyball. What? Yeah, it's a soccer ball, not a volleyball, a soccer ball. And those 12 represent the 12 dimensions of space. And this is an absolute relation to space, mind you, because if you take, you can do it sometimes if you're nimble enough, or if you've got a little bit of glue. If you take a whole bunch of ping pong balls, go out and get 13 ping pong balls, and put a little drop of glue on a ping pong ball and glue it to another, and then take another one and glue it to the same one, you'll find out that the most ping pong balls that you can get around any ping pong ball is 12 around 13th. And if you have infinitely small points or infinitely large points, that if you take the rivers in 3 dimensions and having them flow out in 12 different directions. That is the maximum and minimum number in three-dimensional space that you can have directions that are completely equal. So the whole idea of 12 around the 13th is not only just, 12 is not just a convenient number to make it fit with the 12 disciples or the 12 signs of the zodiac or anything like that. It has to do with the absolute logic of God. It is the most that in any three-dimensional space, no matter how you define three-dimensional space, it is the most and the least number of points that you can surround a given point with. And therefore, if you want to have the most perfect balanced view of space or manifestation in space where you have the most number of viewpoints that states things as they are, you would have 12 around the 13th. Now, this would make for an awful Picasso Cubist-like Ymir, mind you, to have his organs focused all over in space. Now, there's a curious thing about this myth. Nowhere in any rendition have I seen it, in any poetry or any scholar's edition, that Ymir or Ogilmir has ever taken an action of any kind. He just thaws out, and he just is. It isn't even said that it's a he. And this brings us back to something extremely profound that we talked about quite a bit last year. This means that Ogilmir is not only a Titan, but I misspoke last week, but he is the highest Titan. That is Phanes. That represents the depth of the divine spirit, the deepest function that we are capable of. And it is because, if you remember, the Neoplatonists who had these experiences and were capable enough, they were capable not only of transcending thought to selfhood or ideahood, but they were capable of having transcendental experiences where they transcended self to selfness, and beyond that they transcended to the will to be. And this realm of the will to be was as deep as one goes in the consciousness of what the Neoplatonists called the noetic. And they said that things subsist there, that they are intelligible, that they are beyond intelligence because they are the stuff that intelligence is about. They are intelligible, subsistent beings of the highest order. And they, almost like Lao Tzu's Tao, do everything while giving the appearance of doing nothing. This is actually where Aristotle's later conception of an unmoved mover comes from. Only Aristotle's conception is a very prosaic, down-to-earth conception of it, and it certainly isn't the intelligibility of Phanes et al. In the noetic realm. All right. So the consciousness of Ymir, or of ourselves, if we function in that, is not like busy work of taking actions, and when you take an action, you have a reaction. It is above the law of cause and consequence in the simple way of active being. It is of subsistional being. It is. And it is extremely indirect. I think we can begin to vaguely experience that in our lives by practicing our spiritual practices. There are some things, if I have no problems in life, that means I'm not really trying. But if I have humongous problems in my life, that means I'm trying, but I'm terribly egoistic about it. But if I am trying hard and there are problems, but somehow I know that eventually it's going to work out and it's going to be wonderful, then I know that I'm right on. But in another way, that being right on has something else. I know that if I am doing my spiritual exercises, that if I am deeply involved in prayer or in other kinds of exercises, they are a very concentrated kind of activity. And it amounts to a very direct control. A control of the thoughts and of the feelings that is just like the control of an automobile. You steer that automobile where you want it to go, you accelerate it or you brake it, and it's in your control. That is direct control. The more I am doing those kinds of exercises that lead to direct control, the more there is a sense of indirect control. Because all of the things that I am not directly, actively in charge of, I still participate in the universal spirit with regard to them. And there is a sense that is that meditational sense that God is in its heaven and all is well, and no matter what is happening, you sense almost, it's again like a crystal ball. Like in this meditational consciousness, everything is suspended within the light of this universal kind of consciousness. And so Ymir never, it never acts. He never takes any actions. He just... Laugh at myself again. Oh, shameful. He just is, or it just is, and in its being, everything else happens. It may very well be that Ymir's waking up is spontaneous, that he's willing himself to wake up, and he may very well be the source of the fountain, because the lens and the focus of the lens become relatively one and the same thing, especially when the universal sphere concentrates down to being a point sphere. Whether you take that in the sense of physics, where everything, all of matter came out of one point at one time, or whether you take it in the case of mathematical space as we have been talking about it. All right. I'm actually saying most of the things I'm wanting to say, and I'm going to get this in within 3 hours. So, Ogilmir or Ymir is discovered in the melting ice between Niflheim and Muspelheim. He comes to consciousness, and now we're back to the story again. And in his consciousness, he wakes and he sleeps. And almost all of the mythographers, whether they're poets or whether they're scholars, all agree that Ogilmir, as the primary frost giant, is evil. I don't believe it, but it's the same thing that happens in astrology. All of the fixed stars, or the vast majority of them, are considered evil and malefic. Even Uranus and Neptune, when they were first discovered, were considered evil and malefic. The reason for this is we'd like to sleep and we'd like to be comfortable in our little world. And greater heat or greater pressure on us disturbs us. And something that is so profoundly above us, it's sort of like looking at the sun. You can blind yourself by looking at the sun, and you could say then that the sun is evil because it blinded you. It's just that its creative quality is so subtle and so powerful that if in our attention we can only hold together this little bit of matter, very weakly, that to be exposed to that kind of energy would cause it to disintegrate very much like the body of Jesus disintegrated in 3 days. All of these people that try to embalm their bodies by meditation say, well, he lived, his body stayed untouched, unrotted for 5 years after he died. That's nothing but vanity. It's the other way around. You find this in every part of the world, every religion, every part of the world, that people that get involved in being saints or something like that, they have different titles for them. Anytime you put a title or a name on anything, it's dead right then and there. And they all try to prove how saintly they are about how long their body will live after the spirit has left it. That's being very ungenerous to the maggots and all the other beings. But at any rate, he seemed evil because he was so good in the highest sense. Remember, the Neoplatonists thought that the good was the highest attribute. It belonged to the noetic, and the noetic belonged to the beauty, and the noetic belonged to the noeric belonged to the truth. Willing, feeling, and thinking. But at any rate, there is a periodicity of consciousness. Obviously, you can't have polarity without having periodicity. And this is a periodicity in waking and sleeping consciousness. It's the same as with us. We wake and we sleep. Even if we look in our deepest prayers, our deepest meditations, there are cycles where we go in deeper and then we come back out and then we go back in deeper. There is a periodicity. So Ymir sleeps. And when he sleeps, he sweats. And this is not all just homespun, but it's quite meaningful. Because one of the greatest illusions and one of the greatest drawbacks to our spiritual progress is paying attention to how awake we are. Because most of us isn't awake. Most of ours, and it isn't just our spiritual being. It isn't that, we'll go through some wondrous meditations and we'll suddenly be awake to our whole being. It isn't all just transcendental. It's actually in manifest material being. We, in the truest spiritual sense, are doing all kinds of alchemical works right in our physical body. We're breathing, we're alchemizing food, we're moving neurons, we're doing all of these kinds of things, and we're doing them mostly asleep. For most of the activities that we do and most of the experience that we get of the material world, because even in our sense perception we're asleep. We go through the woods with a botanist, we see how asleep we are to seeing, or if we go with an artist, we see how asleep we are. If we go with a geologist, we see that we're asleep. Even in our perceptions, we're pretty much asleep. But all of our somatic existence, we are asleep. And so we're beating our heart, though we don't know it. We're breathing, though we don't know it. Sometimes we can take control of it. And this activity is the experience that we are spiritually getting. It's a big study in chemistry, all the things that are going on. It's a big study in electrochemistry, every neural impulse that we have. And that's really complicated. When you start studying neural nets, you've studied something quite complicated. So we are thawing out just like Ymir is thawing out. And when things alchemize or are changed in our body, those things are changed. Sometimes we can watch our breathing. but we are a little bit aware in the long run of how various types of foods affect us. We eat pepper, we know that that food has affected us. We drink coffee, we know how it has affected us. And there are even more subtle things that take years for us to understand it. Then what's really interesting about this really puts a whole meaning on the idea of mercy killing and such like that. I don't believe myself in sustaining people alive on machines, but this means that even people who are idiots, or even people who are in comas, they're still getting a tremendous amount of experience, even from the physical plane, just in metabolizing. And the things that are changed by the metabolism represent changes in consciousness. Now, much as it may sound repugnant, things like urine and fecal matter and hair and fingernails and sweat represent things that have been very greatly alchemically transformed and emitted from ourselves. In one way of looking at them, they're poisons, but in another way, they're creatively changed. It doesn't take much to see the fertilizer effect of most of the things that come out of us. And so the mythographers, when they're talking about sweat, they're talking about something that in the waking consciousness of Ymir, as he wakes up or as he thaws out in the ice, as he goes through this periodic waking and sleeping, which is something like in some mythologies they call it breathing, like there's a consciousness of in-breathing and out-breathing that is like sleeping and waking. And but there's also, like for example, in the Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine talks about the myth in the stanzas of Dizian. It talks about the sweat-born humans, or the first humans were born of sweat. And this also gives a lot of meaning to doing things by the sweat of your brow. And it doesn't mean just exertion. It means that there is a creative exudation that it becomes our property. That once we have said that we want to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and want to be creatively free to control our own destiny and create our own immortality in that process, we become part of the gods. And even though we are rather malevolent in our creations, for the most part, we are indeed become godlike, and we are doing things by the sweat of our brow. So, while Ymir sleeps, under his left armpit, though some people say the left hand, and between his thighs, things come into existence. Under his left armpit, a first man and woman come into existence. And out of between his thighs tight together comes a six-headed giant, which is unnamed. Now, nothing much anywhere is ever said this is a rough period of life, but that's... Oh, my goodness, where are we here? I'm missing a page of notes. Oh, my goodness. I'm going to have to break. Just a second. I think I've got it downstairs yet. Now, there's a big debate among scholars about whether it was the hand or the foot, hand in the foot, or the armpit and the thighs. The majority of people, especially the poets, go with the armpit and the thighs. I do too, and for a number of reasons. One of them is It's at the armpit and the thighs that the sweat glands are, right? That makes sense. You don't sweat much out of the palms of your hands. At least I don't. Some people, I guess, do. But another reason why the armpit and the thighs is because they agree with other mythologies. And because they orient everything in space as we know space now with the stars. Now we get into a very long and complex subject that we've talked about for a number of times over the years, and we're going to just breeze through it really fast. In the sidereal and the tropical zodiac, the cusp between Sagittarius and Capricorn, leading toward the Capricorn side, is called the southern gates, and the cusp between Gemini and Cancer is called the northern gates. This is something that goes way back into both Hindu and Chinese astrology, but it's especially talked about in Greek astrology and mythology. The gods have one direction on the passage from the southern to the northern to the southern to the northern gates, and the humans go from the northern to the southern gates. That is to say, the gods come in through the heavenly atmosphere of Capricorn, which is above the earth, as high as you can get. And they exit through the lunar region and they die into nature. Nature comes to life by the death of the gods into nature, giving it, laying down their life so that the material world can live. That's one brief interpretation of the gods coming in from the southern gates and going out through the northern. On the other hand, human beings come in to the world through the womb, which is ruled by Cancer, and they go out through the southern gates. They're led out by the Capricorn skeletal man, and they arise and become immortal through fame. This is a tremendous big subject because it is said that the last deluge of Atlantis 10,000 years ago, which was not the main one, but when that island Poseidonus went down in the Atlantic, that occurred when the equinoctial point was right up between, on the sidereal zodiac, between Gemini and Cancer. If one takes Nostradamus' destruction of the whole business, that would take a place in about 7000 A.D. and very close to the time when the equinoctial point would be at the cusp between Sagittarius and Capricorn. So this is a topic that has many, many things to it, and we're still breezing by it through pretty quick. However, these are only the gates. Capricorn and Cancer are only the gates, and the origins are behind the gates. The gates themselves are at the ends of the ladder of the gods. The ladder of the gods goes from the earth to the heavens. And the closest thing to the earth is the moon and Mercury. It all goes by the speed of the planets. And Venus, and in the center of the universe is the sun, and Mars, and Jupiter, and Saturn. And Saturn rules the southern gates at Capricorn. What is behind the gates is the earth and heaven. This was usually broken up into the threefold spirit. It was broken up into the stars themselves were in the firmament, and the light that permeated it all was called the crystallium. And behind it all, the one behind it all was called the primum mobile. Yes. A lot of classical people did. In fact, you can find the whole ladder of the stars among the Hindus also. in the spiritual creativity of it, the heaven part was related to heaven. That is the Milky Way. So that what was behind them was the Milky Way. So things go from the Earth to the Milky Way. The Milky Way, obviously the Sun is a small part out on a distant edge of one of the arms of the Milky Way. And there is a consciousness, a Milky Way galactic consciousness, that is the center for all suns evolving in that entire system. And that our relationship to God is very similar to the relation of God to the center of the galactic being. On the sidereal zodiac, the one that we go around day by day and that we precess around every 25,868 years, the Milky Way falls between Sagittarius and Gemini. And we all know that Gemini is where the arms and the armpits are, and Sagittarius is the thighs, where you warm your hands when you get cold. So the orientation of the armpit and the thighs orients the whole of the great man to sidereal space. So all of this is not just an abstract orientation. The origin of our solar system, the origin of our whole field of evolution is oriented. And in the same way that when we talk to ourselves in our prayers and we commune with God within, that lines us up with all of the centers until we're concentric with the Supreme Being of the whole business. The action of Ymir doing his creative sweating out of his armpit and his thighs shows that there is indeed a spatial orientation in each and every human being of the solar system, and probably, using the principle of analogy, all the way up the line in terms of creativity. The highest of heavens was that Milky Way, and it was also the source of everything in our solar system. That which prepares the space in which we work our creation is. Now, it's clear that the humans had to come out of the armpit, right? Because the definition of humans, I'll say it in the sexist way, but it can be said in another way, man is the rational animal. That is, man is a concrete thinker in the biological makeup that is similar to an animal. In concrete thinking, that which again orients us to that whole concentrative center of things is ruled by Gemini. Whereas the giants, the whole race of the frost giants, which get born out of the ice, which we said last week, were very much indeed identical with the Titans of Greek mythology. They are born out of the realm of ideas. They are born in the meditational realm. Remember, self is an idea, but it happens to be an immortal idea. It's the idea of God. It's the idea of a being that has an identity, and it is the idea of self as God. And so what makes for the divine beings, or what makes for the gods, all of the Titans, is to be born out of the sweat in the thighs of Ymir. So it seems like just a simple homespun little myth, but it is profoundly accurate about about everything that takes place in a creation and in our orientation to that. So we see then that in the birth of Ymir, that we have then a spontaneous creation that goes in both directions from a center, one being more to the concrete realms of matter, that is in the ice, and the other being more in the fire and light. And so we see a relationship then of, in the breathing or sleeping, we see the same relationship as in Jacob's ladder, where the turning point of human beings is where we are no longer creatures, but where we become creators. And that turning point is when it says in the Bible, and the angels shall ascend and descend on the Son of Man, meaning to say that in the turning point in what is referred to as the incarnation in Jesus is the turning point of the whole of evolution. So our orientation is no longer a struggle with the ice, but a melting of the ice, and that we are now changing our focus from the concrete to the divine, and we are becoming creators rather than having to do things on direct creativity. That's all I had time to prepare for. Next time we'll have a lot more, and we'll start getting into a bunch of stories about what happens at the ice party. Any questions? Yeah. Can't you make it shorter?